Today on Flavors and Knowledge, the history of the fork. Hello friends, welcome back to our Food Learning Podcast, where we strive for honest food talk and few opinions. I'm your host, Chef Walter. Let's be honest, dear friends, we really don't have a good dining etiquette, especially in the Western world. As you can see, we taste most of our food from our fingertips. The restaurant industry doesn't help the matter, as many of their new offerings are in a dipping form, forcing us to constantly lick our fingers. And if you don't believe me, please take a look at your next table next time you're out in a restaurant. In the United States, we still consume food with one hand, rejecting the two hands practice, which is the norm in many industrialized nations. And so let's talk about the fork, one of the essential tools we have at our disposal. There are, of course, endless stories and too many unfounded legends related to the food and its evolution. For example, reading The Genius of the Taste, a book written by Alessandro Magno, which was published by Garzanti, tells how Italians' eating has conquered the world. Italy is a peninsula located in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, a land of conquerors and conquered. Consequently, ethnic purity doesn't really exist. Italian food is a foreign mix of ideology and superb taste. But let's begin with the fork history, a tool that seems indispensable to us, but has not always existed on Western Europe's tables. The first appearance, accredited by historical sources, was a silver contraption with a handle and two prongs in the city of Venice, and this happened during the Lord year of 1004. It was probably a derivation from the Greek verb pairon. The fork became the tool of choice in the hands of a Byzantine noblewoman named Maria Agiropoulina. She was the wife of Giovanni Orseolo, which was the son of the Doge of Venice. But unfortunately, the Venetian regarded the use of the tool in question as a mere oddity. I don't expect you to remember the names of some of these people who were confronted with the use of fork during a history time, but if you are a lover of history as I am, you probably will memorize them. After the Eastern and the Western churches split up, which happened in 1054, the situation changed drastically, and perhaps this religious fracture created the initial cultural obstacles in spreading ingenious cutlery. As a result, the fork will take almost a millennium to reach everyone's tables. The first iconographic representation of the fork in Italy is again in the city of Venice, and again brought in by the Byzantine. On the tables of the Last Supper of the Pala d'Oro of the Cathedral of San Marco in Venice, two forks and two knives were displayed, and sublimely destined for Christ and Peter. The cutlery was not for everyone, but only for the principal characters. In some rural and impoverished areas of Italy, an unusual custom prohibited women from using cutlery, and just the head of the family was allowed such a luxury. The trend continued until the early 20th century. The use of the fork remained for a long time limited to the consumption of long pasta. In the city of Milan, in 1288, the gentleman Bonvicin della Riva tells us how people hate their food, mentioning primarily spoons and knives, but not the fork. Eating pasta in Milan was an ambitious job. The fork arrives in the city much later. And in the Renaissance, cutlery shapes changed following society natural evolution. The knife loses its point because it is no longer used to pierce anything. It is then replaced by the increasingly widespread fork, just as Renaissance society is less violent and much less hunter than medieval. Despite the suspicion surrounding it, the fork begins a slow but inexorable conquest of our table from the 17th century onwards. Its shape also gradually changes. If up to the 15th century the prongs were only two, in the 16th century they became three. The fourth prongs arrives in Naples between the 18th and the 19th century, created to twist wrapping long pasta more effectively. And after overcoming the Italian mistrust, the fork sets out to conquer the rest of Europe, not without any further resistance. For instance, Henry III, the son of Catherine de' Medici, tried to impose it in France during the 16th century. Still, the fork will have to clash against the prejudice of its superfluous refinement, especially for Italian files. In England, one of the first forks arrived in 1608 from Italy, following Thomas Coriat, who actually took it back during one of his travels as a souvenir. At first considered a fantastic tool, the Brits are not very keen on the use, and for some strange reasons and unknown to most. In fact, at the beginning of the 18th century, the utensil is absent in part of the mainland and various British Isles. However, the middle to upper classes of Europe, but not so the poor, will begin to consistently use the fork from the end of the 18th century. Still, it will take another century before the Byzantine custom consolidated our shared traditions. And finally, one of my most brilliant ideas came from looking at a group of English people, and while dining in one of my restaurants, they were trying to cut the spaghetti. I quickly thought of a course to teach, especially to those who don't do this since childhood. The one, la practice, that we use in Italy to wrap long pasta around a fork, occasionally with the help of a spoon. And I thought, could it be a success? Or will finger food relegate the fork to oblivion in a few years to come? After all of these years, I am still puzzled by our one-hand dining ritual. And who knows what happens in the future. And that is all for this episode of Flavors and Knowledge and the history of the fork. I hope it was to your enjoyment. Please follow this podcast on Anchor.fm or any of your preferred platforms. I will include all pertinent information on the show notes regarding our travel business, cooking school, and much more. If you are in the kitchen today or tonight, always keep your eyes on the fire, and we'll reconnect on the next round with another interesting food talk and few opinions. Eat safe. Ciao, ciao.